Welcome to the Company of Dads podcast, where we explore the sweet, silly, strange, and sublime aspects of being a lead dad in a world where men, who are the go-to parent, aren't always accepted at work, among their friends, or in their community for what they're doing. I'm your host, Paul Sullivan. Our podcast is just one of the many things we produce each week at the Company of Dads. We have various features, including the Lead Dad of the Week. We have monthly meetups, and we have a resource library for all fathers. The one-stop shop for all of this is our newsletter, The Dad. So sign up today at thecompanyofdads.com/thedad. Today, our guest is Verne Marble, Director of Business Development at Private Advisor Group, a financial advisory firm. But that's not why we're talking today. We're talking about Verne's background as a child, a Navy officer, a brother, a father, and a husband. He's one of four and the father of four. He's been married for 33 years and lives in Overland Park, Kansas. Welcome, Verne.
Hey,
the
Paul.
Company Dads podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I've been looking forward to it.
Key question here, part I left out in the intro on your bio.
Yeah.
You've got some skills that people might be envious of. What's the secret to the
What?
big green egg? Come on, Verne,
Oh,
be honest with us. What is the secret to the big green egg? We've all seen these things. You go into
yeah,
any Home Depot, it's sitting there. It looks, intimidating, but then they have these competitions around it. Like, come
yeah.
on, how does it
Well,
really work, Verne?
if you live in Kansas, you have to know how to smoke meat. So it's just something you have to do, whether it's a big green egg or a Traeger. You've got to have a smoker in your backyard, your patio, your deck, whatever the case is. So, here's the funny story behind how I got a big green egg. I've got friends that have them, and some years ago, I'm not very good about grill maintenance, gas grill maintenance. And so several years ago, and this might be like 10 years ago, I was grilling out on my back deck, um, using a little too much heat, hadn't cleaned the grill properly. My grill caught on fire, almost caught my deck on fire. So, so I needed a new grill because I burned mine up. And it was in the middle of summer, it was right around Father's Day. And so lo and behold, my wife, who's just awesome, it's sort of reading my mind, bought me a big green egg. And it's like, here you go. So I had no choice but to use it and to learn how to use it. So I think the secret is to getting one, like damage your current grill so that you have to get a replacement. Number one, because they're not cheap. But then number two, it's just like trial and error and patience. I love the thing. I cook on it as much as I can. Some diehards would scoff at me a little bit because I don't use it when it gets particularly cold outside, because I just don't want to be outside when it's 0 here in the Midwest and it's icy and all that.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of people that do. But it's fun to get out there and tinker a little bit. So it's great in the summer with a cold beverage of your choice and some steaks or ribs or whatever suits your fancy.
Yeah, I love it. Great story. Great story. On to you as a dad and a husband. In your bio, your parents were divorced, and
Mhm,
mine were as well. And and
mhm.
and I always say, my parents were bad at being married, and turns out they're worse at being divorced. So I know what that experience is like.
Yeah, yeah, similar.
But you live with both your dad and your mom at different times,
Hmm.
after they got divorced.
Hmm.
How has that influenced that experience? How did that experience influence, the dad and husband you wanted to be?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and in the days leading up to today and having this chat with you, I've had a chance, it's caused me to reflect a lot on, what questions you may ask and, what my experience was, growing up. And so I think the best way for me to answer that is it, in particular, the time with my dad. Um, Taught me what I didn't want to be,
Mm,
as a father. That was probably the biggest thing because, well, he certainly, gave me, um, a lot of, uh, I'll call it sort of independence because I had to be independent. When you're a young child or an early teen, you don't want to be independent. My kids say all the time, it's like, Dad, you're such a great cook. Like, how'd you get to be a great cook? I'm like, well, if I wanted to eat, I had to cook because he wasn't home, he wasn't necessarily around. So I think that's probably the biggest influence, on me today.
yeah. And what about when you're also the father for you're one of four. Um, how did the, experience with your siblings when you were younger,
Yeah.
because I always say I'm an only child, so I've gotten better. Like when my kids fight, I've got three kids. When they fight, at first it was a little difficult, but now I sort of understand the dynamic better. But when you think of the influence and the relationships you had with your siblings growing up, with people living with your dad, people living with your mom,
Hmm.
how has that influenced the type of sort of family system you wanted to create in your own home with your own kids?
Yeah, that's another really good one. Gosh, there's a lot of dynamics and complications
Hmm.
here. Um, for a long time, I didn't live with my siblings. So I sort of lived as an only child, like from, and there were periods where we were together when we were younger, but for the most part, I lived independently with my dad until I was about 13 years old and had finished eighth grade. And then at that point, my dad, my dad was an alcoholic. So, my childhood was very tumultuous and sort of up and down. And so when I got old enough, I basically said, look, I can't, Dad, I can't live like this anymore. So I think the best thing for me to do and my dad was not on a path to getting himself well. I said, so if you're not really going to go down this path of getting yourself well, like I got to go live with mom. Like I need some stability.
Yeah.
And so up until I was about 13, I didn't really have a lot of interaction with my siblings. So when I did sort of reunite with them, if you will, what I found was that, and this is the way that I am today, I became a caretaker. And so
Mm.
I always wanted to ensure safety for them. And I always wanted to ensure that they were being taken care of. Now, it took some time for me to kind of get into that role because I also felt like, as the big brother, like I was the boss, right? And I
Right.
have some elements of that come out in my personality, not necessarily my best quality, but and I think some of this is what I kind of experienced and learned from my dad, which was just like it's my way or no way, right? And that's sort of how I treated my siblings for a long time, and under the guise of, well, I'm the older brother, I know well, better, so kind of just do what I say or don't do, what I tell you not to do. So over time, that morphed into more of a true brother type of relationship. But as I think now about my children, and I have adult children, my oldest being 30, my youngest being 20, what I want is harmony
Mm.
amongst
Yeah.
all of them. And what I try to impart on them is, um, look, at the end of the day, you can have differences amongst one another, and it would be weird if you didn't have differences. But A, you have to learn how to resolve those differences, and B, you have to stay close because in life, people will come and go. But if you can keep your family close, those are the ones that you should be able to turn to in the middle of the night when things are not going well, or you need help navigating life or doing life. And so I think for the most part, they're living into that. They're learning how to lean on one another. But that's sort of how I wanted to take like the lack of that when I had or what I had early in my life, and then try and impart that upon my kids.
Yeah. We mentioned in the intro that you're a former Navy officer,
Mhm.
but that came after, going to the University of Kentucky,
Yeah, go
great
Cats.
school, go
Yeah,
Cats. Yeah, my wife is an alum, so she'll particularly like this podcast.
yeah, for
Cats,
sure.
cats, cats, cats. But you finish UK, and
Yeah,
then which is remarkable. You're there in Lexington, you can do any number of things, and
yeah,
you decide to enlist in the Navy.
yeah,
Talk about that decision and why you decided to do it then.
yeah. And I'll give you, and I'll try to keep this brief. I'll give you the run up to why I made that decision. So 13 years old, as I mentioned, I moved from San Francisco, which is where I was living with my dad at the time. And I moved to Eastern Kentucky. Very rural in Appalachia, a little small town in Eastern Kentucky. Didn't even live in the town. I lived out in the county, and this is the coal mining region of,
Yeah.
of Kentucky. So number one, it was a huge culture shock for me going because I'd never like I'd always lived sort of on the West Coast and in the mountain states, had never really been east of the Mississippi, much less into that sort of environment. So number one, it was culture shock for me coming from like the big city. But number two, I look different than everyone else. My mom is Japanese. My dad is German. So I'm half Asian. So I go there and I don't look like anyone else. And I come from San Francisco and they're like, who's this kid? Right. So I had to then quickly fit in. Now, the one thing that I learned growing up with my dad is how to be independent. And really, I learned a lot of survival skills, like how to survive life, like just how to figure things out on my own, because I didn't really have someone to kind of show me how to do that. So what I in my 4 years of high school, which were great, and I developed such great friendships that persist to this day. And I love that part of the country. And I feel like that is when people ask me, where are you from? It's Eastern Kentucky. And I certainly identify with that part of the country. And I have such a love for it now. But one thing that a lot of my life, as I mentioned, is shaped on like what I don't want to do,
Hmm.
or have learned. And what I saw was my stepdad, who was a coal miner. I knew I didn't want to do that, right? And I was surrounded by all of these very hardworking people who struggled in life. And I said, there's got to be a better way to do this and to sort of get out of here. And that was kind of my objective. So college was the path.
Yeah.
And my parents didn't have money to put me through college. So I had to work, and through scholarships and loans and grants and all that sort of stuff, I self-funded my way through school and through the University of Kentucky. So my junior year, I was a business major. My junior year, happened to be walking out of the business school after class one day, and it wasn't a job fair per se, but there were some, employers who had some booths set up, and one of them was a Navy officer recruiter, and I was like, huh, that's kind of interesting. I wonder what that's all about. And I went and I talked to this lieutenant, and he sort of shared with me what life in the Navy could look like, and he asked me, hey, well, let's at least give you this exam and see if maybe you would qualify if you're interested. And I was like, sure, well, happy to do that. And so the exam was something like 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning. And of course, like a very responsible college student, I think I was out Friday night till like 1 o'clock in the morning, something like that. But I go in, I take this test, and I do pretty well on it. And he basically says, hey, you can kind of do whatever you want. Like, are you interested in flying and
Yeah.
submarine, things like that? And so, we decided on a particular career track for me. But the reason that I decided to go that route was, no, I think number one, I just didn't feel like I was ready to go into the private sector. I think I struggled with some confidence issues around like, can I really go out there and get a job? Like, am I learning the right things? And I don't really have connections, and I didn't come up in like the right environment to go out and sort of network and things like that. So for me, I was like, the military can teach me, I can leverage potentially my business experience, and I can get leadership. I can earn money, which was important to me,
Yeah.
right? And then lastly, it provided stability. And as I reflect back on my life, I think a lot of what I seek and the path that I have chosen is because I value stability, because I had so much chaos kind of early in my life.
Yeah. And so then you sign up for the Navy.
Mhm.
Did they pay for your last year or so at Kentucky, or is it
No,
no?
no,
So
they
they
did not.
didn't.
So I went sort of a non-traditional
Ah,
route. I went through officer candidate school, so I wasn't on a ROTC scholarship or anything like that. So just commissioned straight through officer candidate school.
yeah. And as part of your story, though, you realize sort of 2 years into it that it's probably not conducive with the family life you want to have. And now we've had a lot of Navy SEALs on the podcast. They've been lead dads of the week, and those
Mhm.
guys, they flat out say you had no choice. Like you had to, life or death. You had to choose your career.
Yeah,
But you were on a ship. What was it about? Was it being away from your now wife? What was it that you made you
yeah.
realize early on? Okay, this is amazing, great. I love serving, but I don't think it's for me for what I want in life.
Yeah, well, it wasn't quite as early as that. It was in the it was the second year of my second tour. So once I commissioned, I did a 3-year tour on a ship. That's where I met my wife, and I was forward deployed to the island of Guam. And this is back in sort of the late 80s, like 89, 90, 91, 92, when I was on Guam. And we deployed a lot. Like my ship, as a forward deployed ship, I think cumulatively of the 3-year sea tour that I had, I was probably at sea 2 years. Of course, not consecutively, but 3 months here, 6 months there, a month here, right? Like, but
Yeah.
combined, 2 out of the 3 years, I was deployed and away. My wife and I got married. I met her pretty quickly after I got to the island, but we got married fairly young. She was 20, I was 24. And what I experienced being deployed was that I saw a lot of broken men because of because number one, I think their marriages weren't just that strong. And as sort of their division officers, I'd have to counsel them on sort of family dynamics. And I was typically younger than the men that I led, or around the same age. And then I'm responsible for their well-being, right? But I did see a lot of sort of broken family dynamics, and that sort of made an impact on me. But nonetheless, had a really good 3-year tour on my ship, and then had an opportunity to go back to the States and be part of an admiral's staff, which I did. And that was the 2-year tour, I think, that you referenced.
Yeah.
So we moved to San Diego, have a really great tour, and I'm essentially I was department head selected in the Navy, and was preparing to go to department head school, then going back to sea to run a department. However, my wife and I had a child. We had our first child. And what I share with everyone is, had we not had children, I think Lori and I, our marriage could have survived my time away, right? 3 months here, 6 months
Yeah.
there. We could have survived that. But I didn't want to do that to my children. I wanted to be present for them. So that's really the catalyst. Having children is really what caused me and Lori to make the joint decision to leave the Navy after about 6 years of active duty.
And then when you left, is that when you became a financial advisor, or did you do other things before then, or that was
No,
the route that
no,
you took?
yeah, and yeah. So having a business degree, I knew I wanted to get back into the business world. And actually, I'm not a true financial advisor. I work, and my company works with financial advisors, and we provide certain services to them. But I've always been either working with financial advisors or working in the investment management space. So leaving the Navy, I joined a company and spent 13 wonderful years with that company, and they were based in Philadelphia, or suburban Philadelphia. So we made the trek with our pets, our at that point 6-month-old daughter, and moved across the country to Philadelphia, and began a wonderful journey of civilian life.
Yeah. One of the things you've talked about, and I think a lot of people who are dads now who were, children of divorced parents, or had challenging childhoods, they would say what you said, which is, I knew what I didn't want to be, or I knew what I didn't want to do. But you have 4 children, as you said, age 20 to 30.
Mhm.
As a dad, how did you parent so that they would get through life and say, this is what I want to do, as
Yeah,
opposed to, we all know things that we don't want to do, but
yeah.
but they could have a more sort of proactive, positive view on what they wanted their careers to be. How did you do that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I made a lot of mistakes, and I like to think that a lot of fathers make mistakes, and probably made the most mistakes with my oldest, and the least mistakes with my youngest, and I get a lot of grief from my daughters. So my three oldest are girls, and then my only son is my youngest, but my older girls give me a lot of grief of, hey, Christian gets away with murder, and you would never let us get away with that. And I just tell them at this point, I'm just very tired.
Dad's tired. Dad
Right,
needs a
that's
break.
tired. Yeah, exactly. But what I would share with you and the listeners is this: not having a role model for a dad. And as much as I love my stepfather, he wasn't my dad. He sort of married a woman who brought 4 kids with her, ranging in ages from like, 13 to 8. And so he was wonderful in taking us all on, but he didn't know how to parent either, and he did the best that he could. So I kind of had to figure things out as I went. And there's been an evolution in my parenting over the years. And I think number one, early on, I thought my primary role was disciplinarian and provider, right? Make the money and make sure that like there's discipline in the house with the kids and all that. And my wife was the nurturer, and she still is. However, over time, I think what I've learned and what I've evolved into is this. And I listened to one of your podcasts the other day, and I think and I'm not sure when this was time wise, but you said at some point like you stopped yelling, right? It's like, it doesn't serve any purpose. And
Nothing.
and that's kind of where I'm at now, is like, okay, and it's easier when my kids are older, but this transformation has happened over a period of time for sure. So I think at this point where I'm at is much more nurturing, advising, coaching, um, cheerleader, right? Friend if they want me to be a friend, but don't have to be a friend, but just providing really good guidance and sharing, what I've learned in 57 years of life, if they choose to listen or to come and ask. And they do, which is awesome. And I think I'm at a great spot with these kids, but it's because I've listened, I've learned. My wife has helped me quite a bit in sort of working on things like, hey, I think you could have handled that better or differently, and here's what you might, want to do next time and things like that. But then also talking to my kids about these things as well. It's like, hey, when you're doing something wrong, you can just see it on their faces, and just reflecting on those things and really making sure it's like being present. So I listened to the John McCaskill
Uh-huh.
podcast the other day. That was awesome, by the way. He's so good. But just being present and being aware, right? And so for me, a lot of my time, even in the financial services business, I was away. Like I was visiting clients, right? I was managing business. I've for the most part been a remote employee. So my headquarters locations, are not where I live. So frequent travel to meet with teams and things like that. And whether it's San Diego, Philadelphia, wherever, my headquarters have been. So there's been a lot of time on the road, and my wife has essentially taken on the lion's share of the daily rearing of the kids for a long time. And I've missed out on a lot of that. And so she's had to share with me, like, these are things that are going on. And so I've kind of had to come in and figure out, like, how do I pick up from there and actually be present in my kids' lives on a day-to-day basis? Because I'm now, really since the pandemic, I'm home almost every single day. So which is awesome too.
Verne Marble, this has been a great conversation. One last question for you as a guy who's figured it out. I mean, you're
Well, I don't know what
self-deprecating.
happened.
I knew you were going to say that. I could have plugged that in before you even said it. But you admit, that self-awareness is such a huge part of being a lead dad, of being a great father. And you're like, hey, I made some mistakes. I tried this, but you didn't make the mistakes in a malicious way. You just made mistakes. You're like, oh, that didn't work, and
Yeah.
you try to fix it. You looking back with kids going from age 20 to 30, you've made it. You're on the other side. You're about to pivot, and you probably already pivoted with the older girls into a different type of lead dad role, to a different type of role as a father. But when we all figure out parenting on our own, whether we have the greatest parents in the world or we have parents who are struggling themselves. When advice that you might give to other dads listening to this, dads whose parents were divorced, dads who've had to figure out a lot of this on their own, what are some of the things that come to mind, Vern, that you could say, I could share this with you? Here are a couple things that really worked for me, and
Yeah.
maybe they'll work for you.
So a couple things. Number one, and I had alluded to this with the John McCaskill reference. Be present. Like, put the phone down, turn off the ball game, right, and just take things in around you. So that is a big piece of who I am today, is just being present with your kids and being available, right? Just let them know you're available. If they call, pick up the phone, or if they text, respond, right? And just offer advice and guidance when they need it, and sort of take their temperature from time to time. So I think being present is really, really important. I also think, and it took me like a really long time to learn this, is it's okay to be vulnerable with your children and to show emotion with your kids. And I do that often now because I had a health scare in 2021. You never know how long you're going to be here. So you really need to let people know how you feel, right? And what you think about them. So letting my kids, like just being an open book with my children, and for that matter, people who matter in your life,
Mm-hmm.
showing that level of vulnerability, I think is really, really important. The other thing that I would say, maybe two other things. Number one, take care of yourself so you can take care of others and be there for others, and have some outlets for yourself, because you have to have some self enjoyment, and you have to do things for yourself. So carve out time in your day to do that. And then I think the last thing is, to the extent that you can, and that's why I love sort of your mission and your company, have other men in your life, whether it's one, several. I don't have a huge circle, but the circle that I have is really, really tight. And these are men that I love and I trust implicitly. So, have 1 to 2 or however many that you need, friends that you can talk to and share experiences, because that's how we learn, right? We talk these things over. And then I think the last thing is, just know that you're doing the best that you can. And you're right, there is no playbook. Trust your gut and your instincts. Oftentimes those things are right.
Verne Marble, thank you again for being my guest today on the Company of Dads podcast.
Appreciate it, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Company of Dads podcast. I also want to thank the people who make this podcast and everything else that we do at the Company of Dads possible. Helder Mira, who is our audio producer. Lindsay Decker, who handles all of our social media. Terry Brennan, who's helping us with the newsletter and audience acquisition. Emily Servin, who is our web maestro. And of course, Evan Roosevelt, who is working side by side with me in many of the things that we do here at the Company of Dads. It's a great team, and we're just trying to bring you the best in fatherhood. Remember, the one-stop shop for everything is our newsletter, The Dad. Sign up at thecompanyofdads.com/thedad. Thank you again for listening.